listening to The Truth Tank, and I'm your host, The Tank. If you're a first-time listener, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. This episode is going to be the third and final part of the Academy Awards 2023. It went on a bit longer than I had planned, and you're probably thinking, that happened months ago, why do we care? We'll be covering some pretty interesting things on tonight's show, like, are the Oscars rigged? Does the Academy snub certain artists? Does the Academy hand out apology Oscars to artists in one year when they should have won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor in a previous year, such as Denzel Washington, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino and Steven Spielberg? Because these days the criteria to win Best Director or Best Film is vastly different than it was 30 or 40 years ago. It seems to be a hell of a lot easier to win these days, especially if you don't have a huge body of work behind you, like the two Daniels, who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once, compared with a Martin Scorsese, a Tarantino or a Spielberg. Are all the Academy members required to watch all the nominated films before passing judgment on them? The answer might surprise you. We'll be looking at that and a hell of a lot more to end our look at the 2023 Academy Awards. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. This is episode 48 of The Truth Tank, the 2023 Academy Awards, Part 3. Snubs, apology Oscars, and not watching all of the nominated films. Is the Academy trying to please everybody and be liked? Do they want to come off like the popular kid? Are they trying to claw back some of their old popularity and glory days? And maybe they just won't admit that the Oscars are irrelevant or becoming very irrelevant in a modern society that doesn't really care about shiny things and awards and ceremonies the way the rest of the world did 30 or so years ago. Times have changed, but it seems the Academy hasn't. They haven't moved with the times and are probably destined to be left behind by them. And if you look at the last 10 or so years, they've become very woke and political in their choices. If we go back to 2020, Parasite won Best Picture and Best Foreign Film. And like I was saying, it'd probably be too controversial to give two Best Picture wins to All Quiet on the Western Front. I completely forgot that this had already been done 2 years ago. Is that fair? Is it unfair? Does it take away from a potential foreign or domestic Best Picture? If a movie like All Quiet on the Western Front or Parasite wins Best Foreign Picture, that would suggest that it's of a certain caliber and quality that it probably should win for Best Picture overall. But this doesn't happen very often. And I think Parasite's one of the few exceptions where it has won both. Which, when you compare All Quiet and Parasite, can you really say that Parasite was better than All Quiet on the Western Front? Or a more worthy winner? It just seems very strange that they would nominate a film twice in essentially the same category. The only difference being that one's in English and one's not. What do you think about that? I think it's pretty fucking stupid, to be honest. Class them all as Best Picture, or if it's a foreign film, only class it as a foreign film and not overall Best Picture. Because as I keep mentioning, it's basically the same thing. And as I just mentioned about who deserves an Oscar and who doesn't, if you are going to play favourites and give Brendan Fraser or Michelle Yeoh an award based on pandering and trying to say sorry, why not just give them a Lifetime Achievement Award? Because isn't that essentially what the Lifetime Achievement Award is for? The people who have been around for a while but have never won anything. Either for political reasons, or maybe they just didn't get the roles that would get an Oscar nomination, or maybe they just flat out refused to go on the Oscars campaign and play by the Academy's rules. Maybe give Yeoh and Fraser a Lifetime Achievement Award, even though they're relatively still young, especially Brendan Fraser. He's only really been around for 25 years, 30 years maybe at this point. Maybe give them an award like that, or come up with a new category, services to cinema or services to the Academy or some shit along those lines. So even though politics was cut down in this year's ceremony, the Oscars was still political. It was political in terms of it pandered to those that it had fucked over in the past, or those who didn't suit the Hollywood narrative, aka Brendan Fraser. And we all know the Academy loves a good narrative. It loves political narratives, societal narratives, agenda-driven narratives. Every year they seem to base the awards ceremony around a certain theme or narrative. A few years ago it was anti-Trump and fuck the Republicans, and now this year it's let's go on the apology tour for everyone that we've wronged. Last year it was diversity, which came back to bite them in the now infamous Slapgate. A few years ago it was let's apologise to Asians for excluding them from the Academy Awards pretty much forever. So let's have a look at past Academy Award winners and have a look if some of these winners won because of the films they were nominated for, or because the Academy felt like they owed them an apology for ignoring or snubbing them in previous years where they probably should have won. So first up, Denzel Washington's win for Best Actor in Training Day. I've only seen Training Day once. It's been on my list of things to rewatch for a very long time. I didn't particularly like it when I first saw it. I thought it was a bit overrated. It was original, I give it that, but it was a cool concept, dirty cop, good cop. What could go wrong? It's a new take on an old narrative. The one thing I was surprised about that film is when Denzel won Best Actor for Training Day. And judging by the look on his face, I think he was pretty surprised himself. Denzel Washington is one of the greatest actors that's ever lived. I don't think anyone can debate that. He should have won multiple Academy Awards for pretty much anything he's been in, but he wins an Academy Award for Training Day. Now, whether he deserved it or not is not what I'm trying to debate. In terms of some of the characters he's played before and since Training Day, I don't think the performance in that was quite the same as The Hurricane, Flight, Remember the Titans, He Got Game, Malcolm X. I mean, how do you go past Malcolm X? Mo Better Blues. I mean, Denzel's been in so many movies and he's turned out so many noteworthy performances over the decades. How do you pick just one Denzel performance? Denzel has been nominated 209 times in various awards for acting. Out of those 209 nominations, he has 87 wins, including 2 Oscars. He won Best Supporting Actor for Glory in the 1990 Academy Awards, and then won Best Leading Actor in 2002 for Training Day. When you look at movies he should have won an Academy Award for, you can pretty much start at 1991 and work your way till about 2004. So he wins for Glory in 1990. He should have won Best Leading Role for Malcolm X in 93, but he was snubbed. He then should have won Best Actor for Reuben Hurricane Carter in Hurricane in 2000, but then he wins in 2002 for Training Day. Now, is this just the Academy's way of apologising and making up for the previous snubs? Are they just trying to say, well, sorry, here's an award that you really deserve for the last 3 to 4 years, but you're nominated this year and we're going to give it to you because we don't know when you're going to get nominated again. Denzel isn't nominated for an Oscar again until 2013's Flight, then again in 2017 for Fences, followed by Roman J. Israel Esquire in 2018, followed by 2022's Oscar nom for Best Performance by an Actor in a Leading Role for The Tragedy of Macbeth. The last few of those movies aren't his most popular films. Is that another reason some people win and some people don't? Is they just don't seem to be popular at the time, or they just seem to come out of left field? Someone should do a chart on the winners who are popular and in the public eye at the moment who win Oscars compared to those who make a film and either don't go on the Oscars trail or maybe aren't the flavour of the month or haven't been in a movie for a while who win compared to those who don't. Because Denzel hasn't been as popular in the last couple of years as he was in the late 90s going up to about 2015. He was probably undoubtedly the Best Leading Man in Hollywood, but he hasn't been as popular in the last couple of years as he has been. Tragedy of Macbeth and Roman Jail Israel I haven't really heard of. I've seen them pop up on Netflix, but I don't remember seeing them advertised for a theatrical release, not at least where I am anyway. Can you really tell me that King Kong Ain't Got Nothing on Me is worthy of an Oscar? I mean, anyone can play a violent, corrupt cop that thinks he's a homeboy, but not everyone can play it quite like Denzel, and that might be the difference between Denzel winning an Academy Award and somebody else losing, or even not getting nominated. He's not the only big name to not get recognised in the years that he probably should have. Martin Scorsese has been overlooked numerous times. Scorsese has 283 nominations in various awards, with 171 wins. However, Scorsese has only won one Oscar, and that is for The Departed. He has made some of the best films in the last 50 years, and this guy has only won one Academy Award. He should be on his 10th Academy Award by now, not one. He was nominated in 1980 for Raging Bull, followed by 89, The Last Temptation of Christ, 1990's Goodfellas, 2002's Gangs of New York, 2004's The Aviator, 2011 Hugo, Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, and The Irishman in 2019. He probably should have won for all of those films. There's a big gap in between Goodfellas and Gangs of New York, a nearly 10-year gap. So why was The Departed special? You can make the argument that it's a remake of a Hong Kong film or a re-envisionment. The Departed is a masterpiece in its own right in the action, crime, drama category. But was it a Oscar-worthy Best Picture compared to Goodfellas, Raging Bull, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, Wolf of Wall Street, Irishman, etc.? As I always say, if you win Best Director, you probably should win Best Picture as well. I would like to know the definition and criteria of what makes a Best Director winner over a Best Picture, because surely you would think that directing and Best Picture are pretty linked, or are more closely linked than a lot of other categories. You can't make a Best Picture without a great director. There's an article on Screen Rant called Every Time Scorsese Was Nominated for Best Director Oscar and Who He Lost Out To. It is by Arthur Goyaz, published February 21, 2023. Martin Scorsese is one of the best American directors of all time, and although he was nominated for Oscars multiple times, he only won once. Even though Martin Scorsese was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars many times, he only managed to bring a statuette home once, a deserved win for The Departed, which also won Best Picture. Like I said, you can't have one without the other. Scorsese influenced a whole generation with his intricate crime thrillers, many of them adapting unbelievable true stories to the big screen. While Scorsese writes screenplays every once in a while, his best achievements come from directing and producing. Scorsese constantly preaches the importance of keeping the culture of going to the movie theatre alive. I completely agree with that. His career is over 50 years old. His first feature film was released in 1967, Who's That Knocking on My Door? It didn't take long before he received international recognition for Mean Streets, a movie that would seal Scorsese's long-term partnership with Robert De Niro, and his passion character psychology. While it's a good thing that Scorsese eventually got his Oscar, some of his best movies were criminally snubbed. However, the competition was unbelievably tough. Yes, but it's also Martin Scorsese. You could also make the argument that he is contender for one of the top 3 to 5 spots for one of the best directors of all time. He doesn't just make crime or mob movies. All of his movies are vastly different and all have their own visual style and tone to them. But his crime and mob films are definitely a cut above the standard gangster film. Scorsese began to attract the attention of critics after his Palme d'Or wins for Taxi Driver, the acute portrayal of a decaying America that remains relevant to this day. which I am utterly ashamed to admit that I haven't seen. Nor have I seen Raging Bull. I know I should have. I've got Taxi Driver on Blu-ray. I haven't been able to find Raging Bull, but hopefully it's on Netflix somewhere. I know what you're thinking. How can he be talking up Scorsese when I haven't seen two of his most acclaimed films? Yeah, well, fuck you, it's my show. Similarly, Raging Bull offers a violent yet intimate depiction of Jake LaMotta's life, a real-life boxer whose violent impulses would often burst outside the ring. The film was strong at the Oscars, earning 8 nominations and winning Robert De Niro his second Best Actor statue. The snub at the Oscars has been heavily debated, as Scorsese's movie was a clear favourite among the public audience, with Raging Bull even holding up to this day. I mentioned that in the last podcast. The Academy does not give a flying fuck what the popular film is of the year. They hardly ever side with public opinion. They don't seem to choose whatever the popular film is very often. The films that the public actually pay money to go and see, they never really seem to win Best Picture. It's always some obscure or some unpopular title. Maybe that's by design. Do they choose a smaller film, overhype it, give it a whole bunch of awards in the attempt that it will increase its box office earnings or make people go out and see it? Maybe some of the Academy produced these films and they want their investment to do well. If that's even remotely true, then the Oscars would be rigged. However, it's clear why the Academy voters struggled with the decision, as Scorsese competed with Robert Redford, whose Ordinary People accrue a lot of attention for its sensitive approach on mental health and family matters. Kitchen sink drama over an ultraviolet biopic. Nevertheless, while Redford won Best Director and the movie won Best Picture, Raging Bull has still managed to have a great impact on the film industry. As much as I like Robert Redford, I can't say that I have seen or heard of Ordinary People. After Raging Bull's success, Scorsese dedicated himself mostly to black comedies that weren't really of the Oscars' taste. Yep, comedies getting snubbed again. Why not have another category with comedy in it? Black comedies are funny as fuck. Which I didn't know he made too many of them. Interesting. Then all of a sudden, Scorsese released The Last Temptation of Christ, which I'm also ashamed to say I haven't seen. A brutal retelling of Jesus Christ's final days and his dreams of an ordinary life. As expected from a movie of this nature, controversies got in the way of any serious winning campaign for Scorsese, who was nominated for Best Director. Is this a case of attack ads, or was there genuine controversy surrounding the production and or release of the film? Although The Last Temptation of Christ is classed as one of Scorsese's best movies, there was a certain backlash surrounding the film's violence and reoccurring instances of nudity. The artistic content of the film, in this case violence and nudity, shouldn't really be a factor by the Academy, because isn't that in itself another form of prejudice? If they're not picking films because they're too violent or they have too much nudity in it, maybe there's some sensitive members of the Academy that probably shouldn't be on the Academy if that's the reason why a film like The Last Temptation of Christ doesn't get chosen for an Academy Award over something that's more safe, more of the M-rated middle ground drama. Which also is a completely bullshit reason too. He makes violent, brutal, realistic films. Nudity is a fact of life, and so is violence. So either the Academy needs some new board members, or they need to pull their heads out of their conservative, prudish asses. Additionally, the film even earned Harvey Keitel a Razzie nomination. The only Oscar nomination it got was for Scorsese as Best Director, but the award went unsurprisingly to Barry Levinson for his achievement in Rain Man, the Best Picture winner. Rain Man is a good movie. Yeah, it is Oscar-worthy. Dustin Hoffman's performance is great. It wouldn't have been easy. Tom Cruise is great in it. The directing's great. So is the writing. Rain Man is a great movie. It is an Oscar-worthy movie. But if you're not going to pick a film like The Last Temptation of Christ based on its content, aka the violence and nudity, that's a pretty bullshit reason for it not to win. Of all of Scorsese's losses, Goodfellas' Best Director loss was perhaps the most shocking. The film told the real-life story of Henry Hill, a young man who climbs his way up the mafia scene under the wings of the dreaded Jimmy Conway. Scorsese was in a comfortable position with Goodfellas, working around the topic he was deeply interested in, and with enough freedom to make the film as he wanted, resulting in one of the most passionate and impressive projects. I mean, Goodfellas is probably hands down one of the best mafia gangster films ever made. It's a classic. It's definitely a contender for Best Picture and Best Director, but he was snubbed once again. Is this because of the content of the film, such as subject matter, being the mafia, and the violence content, or was it because his directing wasn't as good as whoever won in 1990? Goodfellas, one of the highest rated mafia movies of all time, seemed like it would be a favourite after it won several awards at the BAFTAs, including deserved Best Director win. However, despite being nominated for Director and Screenplay, Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves outperformed Goodfellas, taking home 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. It certainly was a shocking result, but Goodfellas has still managed to have a huge impact on the film industry, particularly in the crime genre. And then again, so has Dances with Wolves, which we'll have a look at in the Avatar episode in the coming weeks. Was this one of the first times the Academy picked a film because it had a political voice over a film that didn't? Or has this happened before? Gangs of New York made a huge success at the 2002 Oscars by earning 10 nominations, but ultimately lost every single one of them. Sounds like Elvis. The film was set in 1865 and recounted episodes in the life of rival gangs competing for control in New York while the Civil War was at its peak. It was Scorsese's most ambitious film yet, costing over $90 million, which $90 million is small change considering the standard price of a Marvel, DC or Star Wars film these days. It's nothing. It's an independent film by comparison. To make and turning the influential city of the 19th century New York into a compelling microhabitat isolated from the rest of the country. Ultimately, Scorsese lost the Best Director award to Roman Polanski's achievement in The Pianist, which is also based on a true story. The film revolves around a Jewish pianist and the atrocities he witnessed during the Nazi occupation, given that Gangs of New York received a lot more criticism compared to his other movies, with esteemed critic Roger Ebert stating it wasn't close to the first ranks of his masterpieces. It didn't really come as a surprise that he didn't win the award this time around. And I would agree with that. Gangs of New York is a great film. It gets a bit flawed towards the end. It's not quite what you'd expect from Scorsese. Once again, it's violent, it's political, it's historical, and it did happen. Daniel Day-Lewis is brilliant. DiCaprio and Cameron Diaz are great, but it's not Scorsese's finest, in my opinion. There's a scene during the opening battle in the big square where both the gangs face off. Someone gets stabbed or shot or something, and they fall to the ground. And that movie has a lot of zoomed-in shots with people pulling a lot of exaggerated faces. And there's this guy, he falls to the ground, and you can see, when he hits the ground, you can see this like foam wadding with fake blood splattered on it, lifting up, and once you see the foam padding on the ground, it's impossible not to see it, which kind of takes you out of the scene. Just a pointless bit of trivia for you. After working with Leonardo DiCaprio in The Age of Innocence and Gangs of New York, Scorsese thought he would be the perfect actor for a Howard Hughes biopic, a groundbreaking filmmaker and aviation pioneer, also featuring the likes of Cate Blanchett, Jude Law, and Kate Beckinsale. The Aviator was another ambitious project that deviated from Scorsese's famous crime narratives. However, the movie was certainly his best shot at winning Best Director since Goodfellas. As evidenced by Scorsese's previous losses, the Oscars' Best Director win relied too much on a Best Picture win. And with The Aviator, it wasn't any different. Although the film earned an incredible 11 nominations, winning 4 technical categories and giving Cate Blanchett her first Oscar, Scorsese lost to Clint Eastwood's $1 Million Baby, which won Best Picture. The situation certainly could have been different had The Aviator won the Best Picture, although that was Unlikely considering it didn't win at the Golden Globes or BAFTAs. The BAFTAs and Golden Globes are a very good indication of who may win, or in the case of the 2023 Academy Awards, who will get snubbed. Elvis cleaned up at the BAFTAs and Golden Globes but was completely ignored at the Oscars. Or who has a good shot at winning, but it's never set in stone. And The Aviator I liked. I thought that should have got Best Director. It's got a very unique style about it. The cinematography, especially in that film, is pretty stunning. It's got all those like weird 1940s green colours, lots of browns. It looks like an old photo, or you see those really old films from like the 30s and 40s. Like the article mentions, it's not a crime movie. It's ambitious, and it still wasn't enough to give Scorsese a Academy Award. It definitely is his most ambitious film. It's probably his most epic. The way it's shot is very unique. And Howard Hughes was an interesting guy. DiCaprio's performance is great. So was Cate Blanchett. Yet it still wasn't good enough to get the ticket of approval from the Academy. There's no political messaging. It's a biopic about an interesting man. It has the added bonus of being set in the 1930s or 40s in the film industry. But it just wasn't enough to win. So it kind of looks like Scorsese is getting snubbed. $1 Million Baby is a great film. It won Best Picture. I'm not quite sure it was an Oscar-winning film, in my humbled opinion. It's a very depressing movie. It's a good movie, but I think The Aviator was a much better and grander film. There's a lot of shots in that film that are very reminiscent of movies that were shot back in the 30s and 40s. Where $1 Million Baby is more of a gritty drama, but who knows why the Academy chooses who they choose. I've only seen The Aviator a few times. I've only seen $1 Million Baby once, and it's not a film I particularly want to see again. It's a pretty fucked ending. Hugo might seem like an unusual movie to fall in Scorsese's hands, but it is one of the director's must-see movies. And I will have to admit I haven't seen that one either. I've got it on Blu-ray somewhere, I just haven't got around to watching it. Which is no excuse. The film tells a light-hearted story about childhood, flirts with fantastical elements, and was made for an estimated $180 million. Hugo was undeniably Scorsese's love letter to the movies, bringing out the kid in him and earning him 2 nominations, Best Director, and since he was one of the film's producers, Best Picture. Hugo swept the technical categories at the Oscars, but Best Director was really between Martin Scorsese and the artists Michael, whose last name I can't pronounce, which had always been heavily praised for its clever old-fashioned style. The awards ended up going to Michael, who pulled off a silent movie right in the beginning of a new decade. And I think The Artist is a clear example of the Academy getting fixated on a movie for its quote-unquote style or artistic integrity or whatever you want to call it. People made a big deal about that film because it was a throwback to silent and black and white movies, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing. I'm pretty sure if back in the day, if they could have made films in colour with sound, they would have. Film is a very evolving media format. Technology plays a pretty big part of it. Superhero and sci-fi movies evolve every 10 years with the advent of new special effects and technology. Those movies get easier to make and you can do bigger and better things with them. And I don't know too many people who have seen that film who really thought it was that good. They thought the dog was the best part of it, and it was actually kind of annoying to sit through a silent film in black and white. It would have been weird to see it in the cinema, especially when someone's phone goes off right in the middle of it. So how does Hugo lose to a film like that? Yes, it might be artistic and it might be creative, but there's a reason people don't make black and white silent films anymore, because they fucking suck. If filmmakers back then could have made them in colour with sound, they would have. In other words, The Artist kind of seems like a pretentious, wanky, low-budget art film for the sake of it. They wanted to be clever and artistic by going back in time and making, quote-unquote, a old-fashioned film. In 2013, Scorsese found himself once again nominated at the Academy Awards when his movie The Wolf of Wall Street cemented his place in the Best Director and Best Picture category. The movie followed the rise and fall of former stockbroker Jordan Belfort, who was found guilty of fraud. This time the challenge was to effectively campaign such a controversial movie in the awards season. The Wolf of Wall Street counted on an excessive amount of twisted sex scenes, drugs, and profanity. Despite it being a huge success, earning over $406 million worldwide, it didn't thrive at the Oscars. 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture and Best Director. Award went to Alphonse Cuarón, who directed Gravity, a visually stunning sci-fi drama, which I don't know of many people who like that film either. And Gravity was definitely the film that was favoured that year, that won a lot of awards. It seems like a pretty average film. It doesn't seem like a Oscar film or the typical Oscar bait film. Maybe that's a good thing. Yes, The Wolf of Wall Street is controversial. It's the biopic about a man that not many people like, but it was an interesting story, and it was a little different for Scorsese. It was crime, but in a different way. I like that movie. I've seen it several times. It's got a cool style about it, and deep down everybody at some point has wanted to live a lifestyle like Jordan Belfort. And this brings us to his latest nomination in 2019. The Irishman was Netflix's best shot at the Oscars and earned Scorsese a Best Director and Best Picture nomination, receiving 10 nominations in total. However, just like Gangs of New York in 2002, the movie didn't win a single statue, with Scorsese losing to Parasite director Bong Joon-ho. While The Irishman was certainly an entertaining story, no one was really surprised that Martin Scorsese didn't take home the win, as Parasite was an unstoppable force ever since its Palme d'Or or win, and was heavily praised for highlighting the inequality and the disparity of wealth between classes. On the flip side of that, it won Best Foreign Film and Best Picture. Kind of looks to me like the Academy was playing favourites. As I mentioned before, it doesn't happen very often when a foreign film wins Best Foreign Film and Best Picture in the same year. It's only happened maybe a handful of times. The Irishman I liked. It was probably 20 minutes too long, but it was a great film. It had the classic Scorsese elements. It had crime. It was historical. I thought it was a cut above the standard historical biopic. All in all, Scorsese's only won Best Director once for The Departed, which he probably should have won, as I mentioned before, for pretty much most of the movies he's made. And these are some of the movies that have been snubbed for a Best Picture or Best Director. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver was snubbed, Casino was snubbed. Casino, like a lot of his movies, it was mob-themed, very violent. Probably wasn't going to go down too well with the Academy. It is a pretty confronting film, but it's still a masterpiece in its own right. And just because the film is either violent or excessively violent, etc., doesn't mean it should miss out to something that isn't. This brings us to another director and writer that has been snubbed by the Academy for just as long as Scorsese, and that is Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino has 286 nominations, 172 wins, including 2 Oscars. So I found an article on Collider, 10 iconic directors who have never won an Oscar for Best Director, by David Caballero, 26th of January 2003. I'm only going to read the Tarantino part. If you want to read the rest of it, look it up yourself. Although he is one of cinema's most acclaimed directors, Quentin Tarantino has yet to claim a directing Oscar, which is very surprising. He's won 2, but they were both for Best Screenplay. He has never won for Best Director, which is surprising because he's definitely one of the most unique and creative directors. He has been nominated 3 times for Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Basterds, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, failing to win each time. Tarantino has won 2 Oscars, however, for his acclaimed and now iconic screenplays for Pulp Fiction and Django Unchained. But I personally thought he probably should have got one for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Hateful Eight. The prolific writer and director could eventually win a directing Oscar, especially if he keeps building an overdue narrative, and indeed retires after his next film, which is interesting. As the article just alluded to, the Academy will give you an Oscar if you are quote-unquote overdue by their standards, or if you retire. So if he wins a Academy Award for Best Director and he does retire, then I hate to say it, you heard it here first. I think it's pretty obvious the Oscars are 100% rigged. Tarantino should have won a few times, so should Scorsese and a whole list full of other directors. But by far one of the most interesting snubs by the Academy is also the most obvious, and that is Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg has been nominated many times for Academy Awards. He's on par with Scorsese and Tarantino, despite having many films nominated and contributing probably more than any other director to the top 100 films of all time. Steven Spielberg has a staggering 323 nominations and 208 wins, including 3 Academy Awards. Which is funny because I always thought he had won a lot more, but he's only won 3. He won Best Director in 1994 for Schindler's List, as well as Best Picture. He wins Best Director again 4 years later for Saving Private Ryan. So his two war films, he wins an Academy Award, and rightfully so. Those films are masterpieces. On one hand, they're political, they're historical, they're dramatic, and they're done in a way that only Spielberg could. Saving Private Ryan was definitely the start of the new generation of war films, gritty, realistic, bloody, and disturbing. Schindler's List is a masterpiece in its own right. Black and white in that film is used perfectly, because the scenes with the girl in the red dress are made even more powerful when the only thing you've seen on screen is black and white. And when you think about it, Steven Spielberg has made so many classic films. He should have gotten an Oscar for every one of them. He can make dramas, sci-fi, action, you name it, he can make it. And more so than making it, he can make it interesting. He's also won the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award, which is a Oscar, I think. So I found an article on people.com titled "A Look Back at Steven Spielberg's Many Oscar Nominations and Wins" by Diane J. Chow. Updated January 24th, 2023. The celebrated director has been nominated 22 times and has won 3 Academy Awards plus the coveted Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award for his achievements in film. 1978, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. First-time Oscar nominee Steven Spielberg was up against a stacked Best Directors category at the 50th Academy Awards. He ultimately lost out to Woody Allen for Annie Hall. Ugh, fucking Woody Allen. Cannot stand his films. Other nominees in the category included Fred Zinman for Julia, George Lucas for Star Wars, and Herbert Ross for Turning Point. George Lucas was nominated for Star Wars. I think I knew that. He had some pretty tough competition, which included his friend George Lucas. Close Encounters is an Oscar-worthy film. So his next nomination comes in 1982. Although Best Director nominee Spielberg lost out to Warren Beatty for Reds at the 54th Academy Awards, the first installment of the Indiana Jones franchise still went home with 5 Oscars that night. Interesting, I did not know that. It won Best Art Direction, Sound, Film Editing, Visual Effects, and Ben Burt and Richard L. Anderson received a Special Achievement Award for Sound Effects Editing. In my humble opinion, Raiders of the Lost Ark should have won Best Picture. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best action film ever made. Changed my mind on that. It also marks one of the first times an action film was nominated for an Academy Award. Because I guarantee you're not going to see any current action movies get nominated for an Academy Award anytime soon. Warren Beatty won Best Director that year. The other directors that also lost out to Beatty in the Best Director category were Louis Malle for Atlantic City, Hugh Hudson for Chariots of Fire, and Mark Rydell for On Golden Pond. His next nomination comes in 1983 for E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The following year at the 55th Academy Awards, Spielberg nabbed 2 nominations, this time for Best Picture, shared with Kathleen Kennedy, and Best Director. Although the film was a huge success in theaters and became a cultural phenomenon, Spielberg lost in both categories to Richard Attenborough for Gandhi. But it's also a huge milestone in its own right, because this is a family-friendly sci-fi film that's been nominated for an Academy Award. And like I said about the action films, you're not going to see any of them nominated anytime soon. It's probably also one of the first times a film like this has been nominated. But it also should have given the Academy clear indication that Spielberg was a force of nature and not to be taken lightly. He's been nominated 3 times in 5 years. He's a busy man. Every couple of years he's got a movie nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, which obviously shows he knows what he's doing. He's no fucking amateur. He's one of the best directors to have ever lived, and he's earned his place in cinema history. So this was followed up 3 years later in 1986 with The Color Purple. Spielberg's next masterpiece became the film adaptation of Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Alice Walker. The film, which starred Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover and Oprah Winfrey, was nominated for Best Picture, but lost out to Sidney Pollack's Out of Africa. Spielberg, if he won, would have shared the honour with Kathleen Kennedy, Frank Marshall and Quincy Jones. On the flip side of that, Kathleen Kennedy didn't win an Academy Award either, because if she did, you imagine how much more unbearable she would have been. She probably would have got more power at Lucasfilm to make even more horrific decisions involving Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And if the rumours are true and she's going to get fired after Indy 5, or when her contract's up later this year, if she won an Academy Award, I don't think she would be getting fired. So in 1987, he wins the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award. At the 59th Academy Awards, Spielberg was given a special honour by the Academy's Board of Governors, and rightfully so. The Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award is given to a creative producers whose bodies of work reflect a consistently high quality of motion picture production, which fits Spielberg to a T at this time. The notable director had already come out with Jaws 1975, Raiders of the Lost Ark 1981, E.T. 1982, Twilight Zone the movie 1983, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom 1984, The Color Purple 1985, and Empire of the Sun in 1987. Richard Dreyfuss introduced the honoree and handed off the statue to Spielberg, who accepted the award at the 1987 ceremony. There's not many other directors or filmmakers who can claim the body of work that Spielberg has, or the consistency. This brings us down to 94 and Schindler's List. The 66th Academy Awards marked the first time Spielberg would win not 1 but 2 Oscars for Schindler's List, which starred Liam Neeson, Ralph Fiennes and Ben Kingsley. The director of the historical drama won both Best Picture, shared with Gerald R. Molen and Branko Lustig, and Best Director. The film beat out The Fugitive, In the Name of the Father, The Piano, and The Remains of the Day. And Spielberg won the Best Director honour over Jim Sheridan, Jane Campion, James Ivory, and Robert Altman. Jane Campion won Best Director last year for Power of the Dog. He follows this up in 1999 with Saving Private Ryan. Spielberg won Best Director again at the 71st ceremony for Saving Private Ryan, which starred Tom Hanks and Matt Damon. The war film was also nominated for Best Picture alongside Elizabeth, Life is Beautiful, and The Thin Red Line. Oh, so Thin Red Line came out in the same year, interesting. But lost out to Shakespeare in Love, and that was mentioned on the Oscars episodes I did last year. Harvey Weinstein was responsible for that. If Spielberg would have won in the Best Picture category, he would have shared the honour with Ian Bryce, Mark Gordon, and Gary Levinson. It's not until 2006 that he's nominated again for Munich. During the 78th awards, Spielberg was recognised with his 10th and 11th Oscar nominations, one for Best Picture, shared with Kathleen Kennedy and Barry Mendel, and Best Director. That year, Ang Lee won the Director category with Brokeback Mountain, the first Asian American to do so. And Paul Haggis and Kathy Shulman shared their win for Best Picture for their film Crash. A year later, in 2007, he is nominated for Letters from Iwo Jima, which is a masterpiece. The following year, Spielberg, Clint Eastwood, and Robert Lorenzo were nominated for Best Picture, but lost to Graham King's The Departed. So it's almost like the Academy sabotages itself by not awarding a film or an actor in one year. It builds up, becomes overdue, and then the Academy needs to right the wrong and hand out the award a couple of years later, which clashes with another film of high caliber that is also worthy of an Academy Award, but you can only have one winner. This is followed up in 2012 with War Horse. The 84th Academy Awards Best Picture category was home to 9 films that year, so they do have more than 5 or 6 nominations some years, which makes it even harder to define a winner. Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy's Warhorse being one of them. The other eight included The Descendants, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, The Help, Hugo, Midnight in Paris, Moneyball, The Tree of Life, and the film that won that category, The Artist. 2013, he's nominated again for Lincoln, which I didn't like personally. I think it would have been better if it was a whole biopic on Lincoln's life and not just the election and the year leading up to his assassination. The following year, Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy's Lincoln was in the running for Best Picture, with 8 other contenders: Argo, Amour, Beast of the Southern Wild, Django Unchained, Les Miserables, Life of Pi, Silver Linings Playbook, and Zero Dark 30. Argo won, and producers Grant Heseloff, Ben Affleck, and George Clooney took home the prestigious statues. This brings us to 2016's Bridge of Spies. Spielberg, Mark Platt, and Christy Markosk's Krieger's historical thriller was nominated for Best Picture, along with Spotlight, The Big Short, Brooklyn, Mad Max Fury Road, which should have won in my opinion, The Martian, The Revenant, and Room. But in the end, Spotlight won, and producers Michael Sugar, Steve Golan, Nicole Rocklin, and Bile Pagon Forst took home their statues. The Post in 2018. Spielberg, Amy Pascal, and Kirsty McCosk Krieger lost Best Picture to Guillermo del Toro and J. Miles Dale's The Shape of Water at the 90th Academy Awards. Other pictures in that prize category included Call Me By Your Name, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, which I thought was boring as shit, and 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. This brings us down to his latest award, 2022's West Side Story. At last year's ceremony, Spielberg was recognised in the Best Director and Best Picture categories for his remake of the 1961 original film. He was up against fellow directors Kenneth Branagh, Ryusuke Hamaguchi, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Jane Campion, who won for The Power of the Dog. West Side Story battled Belfast, Coda, Don't Look Up, Drive My Car, June, King Richard, Licorice Pizza, Nightmare Alley, and The Power of the Dog for Best Picture. If he won, Spielberg would have shared the picture prize with co-producer Christy McCosk Krieger. And his final nomination, 2023, The Fablesman, and we pretty much know how that turned out. The director's latest work is a semi-autobiographical drama about a boy who uses movie making to gain a better understanding of his world. And it's been earning Oscar buzz for months. After winning big at the 2022 Toronto Film Festival, Spielberg called it the most personal film I've ever made. The movie is up for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay at the 2023 awards, in addition to Spielberg's Best Director nod, earning the 76-year-old 3 total nominations. And unfortunately, he didn't win for The Fablesman either. So make of it what you will, but it definitely looks like the Academy plays favourites and snubs a lot of artists like Spielberg, Tarantino, and Scorsese for films that really they should have won an Oscar for. Which brings up the next point. The Academy Awards have always been political, and unfortunately, they always will be. They seem to overcorrect their own decisions. They snub someone one year, that person becomes overdue for an award. I think in most cases when this happens, the artists like Spielberg or Scorsese or Tarantino, they have generally deserved Oscars for pretty much all the films they've made. They've been snubbed for whatever reasons or just lost out. I'm theorising there's probably a certain degree of guilt that is felt by the Academy, and they need to right the wrong so they don't look like they're deliberately snubbing a Spielberg or Tarantino, Scorsese, etc. And they give them an Oscar for a great movie, but not necessarily the film they should have won Best Picture or Best Director for. As in the case of Martin Scorsese and his Best Director win for The Departed in 2006. Which brings up this year's nominees. Everything Everywhere All at Once cleans up. They get fixated on that film. It may not necessarily have deserved to win. Me personally, I would have gone Elvis. It was a popular film with moviegoers. Everyone seemed to love that film. It's a great film. It's a biopic. It's historical. It tells a story a lot of people know, but it's done in a very original and creative way. Tar kind of looked a bit boring. I haven't seen it, so once again, I can't really comment. I haven't seen a lot of the films. I've only seen a few of them. But in my opinion, Elvis should have won at least something for the night. The conflict between two films is pretty evident. It's All Quiet on the Western Front versus Everything Everywhere All at Once. And ultimately, Everything Everywhere All at Once, not Everything Everywhere all the time. As I referred to it on the last episode, pretty much every time I referenced it, ultimately ended up cleaning up and winning the Best Picture. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Academy Awards needs more categories. They should split it into 2 or maybe 3 ceremonies, include more popular films, sci-fi, superhero, action, comedy, animation, kids films. It needs to be broadened and more inclusive, because they always talk about inclusiveness and diversity in the Oscars, but they're not very inclusive or diverse with some of the films they pick. Yes, they're diverse in terms of the films they pick for Best Picture, but they are nearly always from the dramatic categories. You're not going to see Ace Ventura nominated up against Schindler's List. Maybe doing a new ceremony wouldn't be such a bad idea. If they did a whole new show where it's action, sci-fi, and superhero, you could spread it out. It could be more even. And you wouldn't have to have films like Avatar nominated in the Best Picture category, which you know is probably not going to win Best Picture. It's going to clean up in the visual effects and technical categories, but not Best Picture, up against something like All Quiet on the Western Front or Tar. A popular vote probably wouldn't hurt either. It'd probably get a lot more people interested in the Academy Awards again. If you want to talk about the best and most popular film from last year, it is hands down Top Gun Maverick. I mean, that film was a fucking unstoppable juggernaut at the box office. People loved it. People saw it and wanted to see it again. I think after Avatar 2, it made the most money for a film last year. Even though it was nominated for Best Film, you know it's not going to win. It'd also be nice to see the Academy stop pandering. They don't need to have an awards show for movies and pander to political correctness and social issues and apologise to everyone they've ever snubbed in the past, who or whatever has been neglected in previous years. They need to keep it about the movies and keep it relevant again. I also heard that not all the Academy members this year watched all the films that were nominated. But isn't their job to watch films if they're passing judgment on the films? Every Academy member should watch every film, and they should probably do it all at the same time. They need to be probably held accountable and make sure someone is watching those who are watching the films. So I found an article on Reader's Digest titled "What Hollywood Insiders Won't Tell You About the Academy Awards" by Tina Donvito, 31st of January 2023. Break out your ballots. You may be just as qualified to pick the winners of the Oscars as some official Academy Award voters. We think of the Oscars as the height of filmmaking achievement, and in many cases it does reflect the best work of the entertainment industry, but there's also a lot of behind-the-scenes schmoozing that goes into scoring Oscar nominations and wins, not to mention the Academy members themselves may not be as qualified as you think they are to judge the top awards in film. Criticism of Oscar choices isn't new, but it seems to be on the rise as many of the movies selected are either too commercial, too obscure, or too conventional for the general public to really understand why they were picked. Let's take an inside look at the members and why they choose the movies they do. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious in some of the choices. They're drastically different. They're at both extreme ends of popular and non-popular films. Like I said on the last episode, how do you compare Avatar: The Way of Water to Tar, All Quiet on the Western Front, to Everything Everywhere All at Once, and so on. Shocker, Academy members don't watch all of the movies. Which is funny because you think it would be a job requirement to watch all of the films. If you're the voting academy, you think you would have to watch every single one of them and come to some type of an agreement. But obviously this isn't the way that it works, which I thought that's how it would work. It seems logical that it would, but I guess not. A poll from The Hollywood Reporter confirmed what many suspect. The people who decide Best Picture don't necessarily watch the movies before they vote. In the poll, nearly 6% didn't watch the nominated films. Turns out it's all an honour code as to whether Academy members have actually watched the movies they're voting for. I feel very committed to watch all the movies because it's important to give every filmmaker his or her chance, one member told Good Morning America. But it's an accurate statement to say there's nothing checking if people watch all nominated movies. And that's not good enough in my opinion. If your job is to watch movies and pass judgment on said movies that can affect the outcome of the Academy Awards, you should have to watch all the films. It should be a requirement, and there should be some type of oversight to make sure Academy members are watching all the films that they're supposed to. Members should read the screenplays, but do they? We tend to think of screenplays as just the dialogue the actors say, but there's a lot more to them. They include stage directions, how the actors move, background info on characters and actions. They also touch on setting, yada yada yada. For example, the first page of Oscar-winning screenplay Good Will Hunting reads like this. Interior, L Street Bar and Grill, South Boston. Evening. The bar is dirty, more than a little run down. Is there ever a cook on duty? He's not here now. As we pan across several empty tables, you can almost smell the odour of last night's beer and crushed pretzels on the floor. Academy members get the actual screenplay to read for voting, either in hard copy or electronic form, but again there's no guarantee anyone's actually reading what's been sent to them. Voters are not very diverse, when that's painfully obvious. In 2012, the Los Angeles Times revealed that Academy members were 94% white and 77% male, and that the vast majority of members were over the ages of 50. Although the Academy pledged in 2016 to increase diversity, they've only been moderately successful, as this year's snubs of female directors and many people of colour have reflected. That's issues been going on in the Academy in Hollywood for a very long time. According to CNBC, the Academy membership is currently 32% male and 16% people of colour. These award show scandals rock the industry. The Academy is growing. In an effort to change the makeup of the Academy, new members are being added at a rapid rate. I wonder if I can join. In 2019, 842 new members were invited to join, and a whopping 928 invitations were extended in 2018, way up from just 322 in 2015. And yes, you have to be asked to join, as well as sponsored by 2 existing Academy members unless you're an Oscar nominee, in which case you're automatically considered. The Academy Board of Governors ultimately decides who gets in. Although according to the official rules, membership is supposed to be limited to film artists working in the production of theatrically released motion pictures, some critics have noted that artists more known for their television work are being let in. Interesting. There must be a lot of people who don't accept, because that seems like a lot of people. How are you supposed to discern a single winner when you have nearly 1,000 people who have been invited to join the Academy? I mean, I don't know how many the final number is. Even if there was 300 people, how did they discern a winner from 300 separate votes? But then again, I guess they decide elections. So maybe I'm just talking complete and utter nonsense. Academy members can't lobby. If you're an Academy member, forget about throwing that Oscar movie viewing party in your home theatre or attending those big screening parties put on by the studios. So then what's the point of putting on the parties or the screenings? According to the official Oscar regulations, after nominees are announced, no Academy member can be listed as a host for a screening. Plus, although Q&As with people involved in the film are allowed after a screening, Academy members who aren't part of a movie can't moderate the Q&A, and no swag can be given out at screenings either. It's all an attempt to keep voting for the winners as fair as possible in Hollywood. More members can now vote for Best International Film. What's Best International Feature Film? That's a category previously called Foreign Language, changed in 2020 from the outdated term to better reflect the global filmmaking community, and about time. And they should definitely be a bit more inclusive to films from around the world. And in order to get more members involved in watching the international films, there are now a two-phase voting process for nominees. In Phase 1, the Academy's International Committee watches all contenders submitted for consideration and narrows it down to a short list of 10. In Phase 2, all Academy members who watch the 10 films, including via streaming services, can vote for the 5 nominees. If you're interested in where movies were shot around the world, check out these 60 yada yada yada. To be considered, films have to run in theatres at least briefly, and I touched on that on the Oscars episodes I did last year. But voters can watch from home. The Academy is increasingly made up of members all over the world, so they need an easy way to see the Oscar contenders, and mailing DVD screeners is expensive and not very environmentally friendly, so voters can watch on a special members-only streaming platform. Interesting. members.oscar.org. Members with a 4th generation Apple TV or an Apple TV 4K can also download the Academy Screening Room app to stream the films. But the Academy still prefers its members to see films on the big screen. In an email to members last fall, as reported by The Hollywood Reporter, the Academy noted, "We encourage you to view as many films as possible during the theatrical release and at additional theatrical screenings made available wherever members actually do that, though it's up to them." Yeah, because they're pretty insistent that streaming services have to have a theatrical release to qualify for nomination, but there's no rule stating that the members have to, an Academy member has to go to a theatre to watch a movie theatrically, so they're not allowed to attend parties or screening events, but they can watch and stream stuff at home, which seems fair enough because there's probably a lot of films, but you would think that you want to see it in the theatre because after all, there's a different atmosphere and a different vibe in the cinema compared to your living room. After all, that's kind of what you're voting on, isn't it? Is films and films that get released into theatres. The Academy may not be as elite as you think. In addition, as examined in The Hollywood Reporter, the secret society like Academy isn't as A-list as it appears. Its secret is that it actually includes many people who don't exactly belong there, such as those who haven't been active in the industry in a while and those who didn't have much film experience to begin with. But the Academy has taken some action on that front, now giving new members a 10-year membership, which can be renewed if the member has been active in the industry that decade. After 3 decades, members earn lifetime of voting rights, as do Oscar winners and nominees. Some of those older members might have even started out when it all began, at the very first major award ceremony. For current members who don't retroactively meet the criteria, they'll be moved to emeritus status. They're still technically members, but they don't pay dues and can't vote. Okay? To be a nominee, at least one voter has to choose you as the best. While Academy members can list up to 10 candidates when nominating for Best Picture, no matter how many votes a movie gets overall, it cannot earn a nomination unless someone ranked it as their first choice. Okay, interesting. Comedies often get snubbed at the Oscars, that's painfully obvious, but that doesn't mean they're not amazing. These are the best 100 funny movies of all time. I'm not going to read that list. Be here all fucking day otherwise. Nominee selection takes a lot of math. If you think you could better select the Oscar nominees and winners than the Academy, you better be a mathematician. Which doesn't surprise me, everything seems to be so overly complex now, or is made to appear to be overly complicated, so no one can actually figure out how or why it works the way it does. There's a reason the Academy hires the accountants at PricewaterhouseCoopers to tally up the votes. It's an incredibly complicated process, particularly for counting the nominees. First branch members vote for their top 5 nominees in the category, ranking them in order. Then the accountants use a formula to find the magic number to be considered the number of ballots received. To be considered, the number of ballots received divided by the number of possible nominees plus 1. Then they separate the ballots by first choice picks and when a candidate reaches the magic number of first place votes. They're in and the ballots set aside. Next, the candidate with the fewest first choice votes is eliminated. Those ballots are redistributed based on second choice selections and the process starts again until all slots are filled. Phew. That's complicated, no wonder the Academy leaves it to the pros. Yeah, it does seem very overly complicated. In my mind, I was picturing a bunch of stuffy old movie critics in a room watching a bunch of movies, writing down which one on a card and putting it into a hat. Or something more simplistic. Not all members go to the ceremony. Given the Academy has slewed to around 8,000 members, fucking hell, how does anyone decide? And definitely throwing our votes into a hat and sorting out the nominees that way would definitely not work. Not all of them can fit inside the Dolby Theatre for the presentation of the awards, and it's pretty obvious. That makes logical sense. I don't think the theatre holds that much, and you obviously need space for the people who are actually nominated. So how do you snag an invitation? About half of the seats are filled by nominees, presenters, their guests and studio executives, and the other half are distributed to members through a lottery system. Okay, that seems pretty fair. Thanks to one short film director, Dave Mullins, we even know what an invitation looks like, as he tweeted a picture of his invite for the 90th Oscars. It reads, "You and a guest are cordially invited to attend the Academy Awards presentation, immediately followed by the Governor's Ball, Sunday the 4th of March at 5 p.m, the Dolby Theatre, Hollywood and Highland Center, Hollywood, California. Black tie. As for everyone else, they're probably watching at home in their pajamas, just like you." I think my biggest concern if I was invited would be what to wear. I definitely wouldn't go the standard black tie route. What can you get away with and still be black tie? A black tie tank top? Maybe, maybe not. It's highly competitive to make it to the memory reel. Competition is fierce for a spot in the annual montage of Hollywood's finest who recently passed away. According to the New York Times, a committee of secret Academy members decides which deceased stars to include, warding off lobbying publicists, family members and others. If you always shed a tear while watching this segment, you're not alone. This is why we react so strongly to celebrity deaths. I thought it was whoever had passed away that year was included in memoriam, but turns out it's not the case. Which is interesting. Gets you to learn something new every day. So, the Academy seems to live in its own little bubble, in its own little universe. They're very isolated from what goes on in the real world, even though they do like to mention and support some causes, such as the war in Ukraine, or mention it in the Academy Awards. I don't think there's a lot of actual support coming out of Hollywood for anything that isn't Hollywood related. Hollywood tends to live in its own little bubble and fixate on its own little universe, and everyone else can go fuck themselves. We've seen the Academy favours two films and plays them off against each other, and it doesn't always matter if you're a Steven Spielberg, a Martin Scorsese or Quentin Tarantino. That's no guarantee you're going to go home with an Academy Award at the end of the night. The two Daniels from Everything Everywhere All at Once have made very few films. They've made more music videos and short films than they have actually feature films. It took Steven Spielberg about 30 to 40 years to finally win an Academy Award, and he was consistently making feature films every second year. And these are films that are all in the top 100 greatest films of all time, such as E.T., Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So consistently making movies and being the top of your field means jack shit to the Academy. And as we just learned through the article, it seems to be an overly complicated voting process. In order to get nominated, everyone has to like your film or performance, and if they don't, then you get bumped down to a secondary category and then pretty much forgotten about. In the end, this begs the question, are the Academy Awards actually about the movies? Because in recent years, it seems the Academy Awards is more about politics and less about films, actors, actresses, directors, producers, writers, editors, etc. If the Academy wants to attract the general public back to the Academy Awards, It needs to make the Oscars about the movies again, and not the politics. Leave politics to the politicians, and filmmaking to the filmmakers. Alright, that concludes our epic 3-part look at the 2023 Academy Awards. The next episode will be the long overdue Avatar 2: The Way of Water review, and a look back at the history of Avatar, the production, the trials and tribulations James Cameron faced while making and writing that film, as well as some of the technical achievements in 3D fusion cameras, motion capture, and virtual filming that all came about as a result of the production of Avatar, which are basically industry standards these days. It's a lot more interesting than it sounds, as well as the history of motion capture. Its origins might surprise you, so definitely stick around for that. And that brings us to the end of the show. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. Just before I end the show, a big shout out to Origin Canine. It's a small Australian-run business run by Tom, a ex-Australian trooper. His business focuses on high-end tactical products for dogs and their handlers. Definitely check him out on Instagram if you have a four-legged friend. You can get yourself some high-end tactical dog harnesses, adjustable collars, and one of my favourite items, the expandable water bowl, which if you've ever taken a dog on a hike will come in very handy, because you don't want to be lugging a water bowl up a hill in your backpack when you can have a expandable one you can fold up and put in your pocket. So definitely check out Tom over at Canine Origin on Instagram and get you and your four-legged companion some high-end tactical canine gear. And that brings us to the end of the show. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give it a follow and a like. If you have the time and you're willing to do so, why don't you think about leaving a review on the show? It helps the show grow and get found. You can download all your favorite episodes on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Podbean, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell people you work with, or anyone you think might like the show. And don't forget to subscribe to the Truth Tank on YouTube. Next episode will be out in a couple of weeks, but until then, I'm a tank. This is the truth. May the truth be with you.
Thank you.